let's start with a really fundamental question. What is entrepreneurship? Is it really just about a special kind of person, or is it about a special kind of opportunity? Well, back in 2000, Scott Shane and S. Venkataraman published a paper that completely changed how researchers approached that very question. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into their incredibly influential work, The Promise of Entrepreneurship as a Field of Research.
So, here's how we're going to break down their argument. First, we'll look at the scholarly conversation they were jumping into and the big problem they saw. Then, we'll unpack the conceptual framework they proposed to solve it. From there, we'll trace their line of reasoning step by step. We'll then get to the core propositions of their theory. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the paper's lasting contribution and the research agenda it kicked off. All right, let's set the stage. What was the major issue that Shane and Venkataraman felt compelled to address? The authors really didn't pull any punches. They argued that at the time, the field of entrepreneurship was, frankly, a bit of a mess. It didn't have a clear conceptual framework. As they put it had become a hodgepodge of research. Basically anything related to new businesses or small businesses was just thrown under the entrepreneurship umbrella. And the big problem with that is that it seriously undermined the field's legitimacy. It was hard to take it seriously as a distinct field of academic inquiry. So, what was the root of this problem? Well, for decades, the research had focused almost exclusively on the person, the entrepreneur. You know the questions. Who are they? What psychological traits do they have? But this misses half the story. It's like studying race car drivers without ever looking at the cars or the racetrack. You can have the most enterprising person on the planet, but without an actual opportunity, there's nothing to be enterprising about. So the authors propose this critical shift in focus, away from just the individual and toward the nexus, that crucial intersection of opportunities and enterprising people. So if you're going to rebuild a field of study, you have to start with the fundamentals. You have to define your terms. Let's look at the core concepts that form the bedrock of their new framework. And here it is, their new definition. Now, this might just look like a block of text, but it's a huge deal. Look at the word right at the center of it, opportunities. The field of entrepreneurship, they argue, is not about the type of organization like a startup. It's about a process. It's about how opportunities are discovered, evaluated, and exploited. That's it. This seemingly simple change decisively puts the opportunity, not the individual, at the very heart of the entire field. Okay, so what is an entrepreneurial opportunity then? Put simply, it's a situation where you can introduce something new and, crucially, sell it for more than it costs to make. But here's the key insight. They argue that these opportunities are objective phenomena. They exist out there in the world separate from any one person's perception of them. The hidden treasure analogy works perfectly here. The treasure is objectively real and buried in the ground, but it takes someone with a map and the insight to follow it to actually find it. The opportunity exists, but its discovery is a subjective process. Now, this is where they make a major break from a lot of traditional economic models. Many of those models assume the economy is in a state of equilibrium, right? Everything's stable, information is perfect, and so real opportunities for profit don't really exist. But Shane and Venkataraman say, no, that's not how the world works. They argue the economy is in a constant state of disequilibrium. It's always changing. Think about new tech, new regulations, shifting social values. All this change constantly churns up new information, and that is the soil from which opportunities grow. So we've established that the world is messy and full of change, which creates opportunities. But let's dig a level deeper and follow their argument for why these opportunities exist at all. Their entire framework really hinges on this one fundamental question. Why do these opportunities even get a chance to pop into being in the first place? And the answer they give is both simple and profound. It's because people value things differently. An opportunity is born the moment someone looks at a set of resources, could be land, tech, an idea, and thinks, hey, that is not being put to its best use. The warehouse example is perfect. One person sees an empty, costly building. An entrepreneur sees a future co-working space. That difference in belief, that information asymmetry, is everything. It's what allows the entrepreneur to get control of those resources for less than their potential future value. Okay, that makes sense. But it begs the next logical question, right? If these different beliefs are so important, where do they actually come from? The authors point to two primary sources, building on the shoulders of giants in economics. First, you have market errors, which is an idea from Israel Kirzner. This is all about alertness, spotting an imbalance like a shortage or a surplus, and stepping in to correct it for a profit. The second source is pure Schumpeterian creative destruction.
Constant societal change, technological, political, social, creates brand new information. And since that new information isn't beamed into everyone's head at the same time, the people who get it or understand it first are the ones who can see the new opportunities.
So now we have a world that's buzzing with potential opportunities. But they don't just magically turn into businesses. People have to actually do something. And this brings us to the core propositions of their theory, the processes of discovery and exploitation. They model this whole process as a kind of two-step dance. First, you have the discovery of an opportunity, and second, you have the conscious decision to actually exploit that opportunity. So, how does someone even discover one of these opportunities? It's not random, and it's not just about being lucky. The authors argue it happens at the intersection of information and cognition. First, you need prior information, your unique background, your job, your hobbies. They create what the authors call information corridors. A software engineer is just way more likely to spot an opportunity in a new programming language than a baker is. But that's not enough. You also need the cognitive properties, that mental leap to connect the dots and see a new means-ends relationship that nobody else has seen yet. Of course, just spotting an opportunity is only half the battle. You have to decide to act. And that decision is really a two-sided equation. On one side, you have the nature of the opportunity itself. Is the expected value high enough to make the risk worthwhile? Then on the other side, you have the individual. Someone with lower opportunity costs, better access to capital, a higher tolerance for risk, or just a bit more optimism is far more likely to say yes and take the plunge. Now here's a really important point they make, one that often gets overlooked. When we hear the word entrepreneurship, our minds almost always jump to a startup, but that is not the whole story. Shane and Venkataraman are clear. An opportunity can be exploited in two different ways. You can create a new firm, a hierarchy, to go after it, or you can pursue it through the market by selling or licensing your idea to an existing firm. All right, let's bring this all home. When you put it all together, what's the big takeaway? What did this paper actually do for the field, and where did it point researchers for the future? You could say that before this paper, entrepreneurship as a field was sort of wandering between the big houses of economics and management. What Shane and Venkataraman did was give the field its own house, with its own solid theoretical foundation. By defining the domain around the discovery and exploitation of opportunities, they carved out a unique and, most importantly, a legitimate space for scholarly work. And this is where they leave us, with a powerful research agenda, a clear roadmap built around three core sets of questions. First, why, when, and how do opportunities even come into existence? Second, why, when, and how do some people, and not others, discover and then exploit those opportunities? And third, why, when, and how are different modes of action used to exploit them? By framing the entire field around these questions, Shane and Venkataraman didn't just write a paper. They really did build a new foundation for a whole generation of research.